Well, tonight has so far yet to bring a repeat of last night's U.S. airstrikes on Iran, but the last 24 hours have seen the war widen, this time to Egypt, where a drone hit the port of Damietta, setting 2 ships there on fire. It's the first time that country has been targeted in the war. No one has claimed responsibility, and today Iran's foreign ministry urged vigilance against what it called false flag operations designed to undermine regional peace. The foreign minister also warned Cyprus and Bulgaria against allowing the U.S. to use their bases to launch attacks on Iran. In another sign of expanding hostilities, Saudi Arabia, for the first time in this war, joined the U.S. in a strike against Iranian-backed militias inside Iraq. Joining us now, retired Army Lieutenant General Karen Gibson. She's the former Director of Intelligence for U.S. Central Command, and former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Nicholas Burns. Good to have you both on tonight. General Gibson, if I could begin with you. If the president orders further strikes, even if they were to, say, escalate in some sort of broader 10 to 2-week plan, series of strikes against Iran, is there any evidence that you have seen that continuing such strikes will change the dynamic on the battlefield and bring the U.S. closer either to getting Iran to the table or achieving its broader goals in this war?
Well, that's a great question, Jim. It's really the question of the day. And I think the strikes, while they've been very effective tactically in degrading and destroying much of Iran's military capability, there is not any evidence, as you suggest, that they've moved the needle on Iran's intent or their strategic calculus. I think all along, Iran's strategy has been to survive, to avoid capitulation, and to make the war so politically and economically untenable for us that we call it quits, ease up on our demands, are less demanding of Iran. And they think that time is on their side. They don't have to defeat us militarily. They just have to absorb our strikes. And one more point, Jim, I would just say that each time we signal some sense of urgency for wrapping this up quickly, they know there are concerns about gas prices, about inflation, about midterms. And when we express that urgency, it just fans the flames for them and makes them feel even more confident that they can wait us out, that we are too impatient to see it through, and that if they just sit tight, we will eventually back off.
So, Ambassador Burns, it sounds like America's credibility in the region is weakening, right? And that if adversaries believe that, I wonder if allies believe that as well. So how, in your view, should the U.S. be talking to its allies to win that credibility back?
Jim, I think this is a full-blown crisis for the United States. If you think about what's happened just over the last week, you have the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed to normal shipping. You have a real question about the Red Sea, and the Bab el-Mandeb can be an outlet for the oil and gas that needs to come out of the Middle East. And now you have the Suez Canal in play, with the drone attack on Egypt yesterday. So this is a profound crisis for the energy producers of the Middle East. But think of the Japanese, the South Koreans, the Indians who have to import their energy from the Middle East. So the president's credibility and U.S. credibility is in question. And I think what he has to do right now is prepare the country for a long, drawn-out conflict. I don't see this ending this month, this coming month of August. I think goes into the autumn and probably aspects of this crisis into 2027. So prepare the country. This isn't going to end soon. We can't just walk away. Secondly, what the president could do is what he might be uncomfortable doing, and that's asking for help. If you have those Asian allies that need the strait to be open, you have Europe partially dependent on Middle East oil. You have all the Gulf states at play here, as well as Israel, a major coalition to do 2 things: to pressure the Iranians diplomatically with one full-throated voice, but also to exact economic sanctions on the Iranians, because we know their pressure point, maybe not so much as their military, it's their economy. That has to happen. But Jim, I think ultimately, this, as General Gibson says, this is going to be a war of attrition. We're going to have to grind down their military, but they're not going to give in anytime soon.
Well, but Ambassador, there's another credibility question, too, because deals with this president I think one can reasonably say don't always hold up. Ask the Saudis about the nuclear deal. The president seems to be raising questions about his promise to allow Ukraine to build interceptors under license. Ask any U.S. trading partner about trade deals negotiated in the last months and several years. Why would Iran calculate rationally that if it negotiates with this president, that any deal will hold?
Well, I think General Gibson is right. The Iranians are going to wait us out. Mm-hmm. They think they're tougher and more resilient than we are, and they don't have midterm elections and public opinion to contend with. So I think that's a factor here. That's why I think, Jim, your question is a good one. I don't think the Iranians are going to trust commitments made by Steve Witkoff or Jared Kushner or President Trump himself. It's why you need to internationalize this conflict a bit to get other countries that the Iranians do care about to come in with economic sanctions. The Saudis have this idea just floated today of a coalition to try to secure shipping channels in the Red Sea. The British and French have been talking for well more than a year about a coalition of countries that would come in to the Hormuz eventually, if there is a permanent ceasefire or a durable one, to escort ships through the strait. So the U.S. simply cannot succeed on its own. It needs help from the allies that the president has spent a lot of time demeaning recently.
General, last night, as you know, Russia unleashed just a massive missile and drone attack once again on Ukrainian cities, once again targeting civilians, and civilians suffer, children. But at the same time, one of those missiles landed deep inside Poland, of course, a NATO ally. And we're seeing a reaction that we've seen when this has happened before with drones, et cetera. Questions as to whether, well, you know, was it accidental? Was it deliberate? Has NATO been tough enough in the face of these times, multiple times now, when the war has seeped into NATO territory?
Well, I think obviously there's a reluctance on the part of NATO to take on Russia wholesale. You know, certainly there's support for Ukraine and to provide them with all kinds of military or financial incentives and support to help them hold the line against Russia. But I think, you know, there are certainly times when, whether it's a drone or in this case a missile, Russia is probably testing NATO and seeing how they respond and where their red lines are. But I wouldn't assume that every time a missile or a drone enters NATO territory that it was necessarily intentional. What I would like to point out, Jim, on this massive barrage last night that Russia launched against Ukraine, they're doing it as a substitute for their inability to make progress on the ground. They hope to degrade Ukraine's economy, to erode their civilian will, to damage their military-industrial complex. But I can't help but link the two conflicts, Iran and Russia-Ukraine, in that Russia is now aware that there's a depleting supply of these very special interceptors, and the ones that Ukraine uses are the same ones, drawing on the same industrial base that we are using in the Middle East. And so certainly perhaps taking advantage of or even exacerbating that critical shortage.
That is certainly what the Ukrainians believe. They believe they're taking advantage of those shortages. And, of course, the people suffer. General Gibson, Ambassador Burns, good to have you both on. Thank you.